Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. In this video, we are going to discuss Strapi. Now, I'm over here in the Strapi landing page, and it says that Strapi is the leading open source headless CMS, and it's 100% JavaScript, fully customizable, and developer first. So what do we mean here by headless CMS? And let's actually begin by defining this right over here, CMS. CMS stands for Content Management System, and essentially it's a way that we can manage the content inside of our application. For example, let's say we had an application that displays sports cards. Well, that right there contains a lot of data, a lot of content. For instance, each card might have a title, a description, a picture, some sort of statistics, so numbers. All that content has to be managed in some way, and we can actually manage that through tools like CMSs. Now, there are many CMSs, and you might be kind of familiar with one of the most popular ones, WordPress. Now, WordPress is a CMS that also creates the UI elements for us. So essentially, we can basically manage our content through WordPress, and we can link them to some predefined, pre-configured UI elements that WordPress gives us. Now, that might not be all too great. Sometimes we want to customize the functionality, customize the UI elements. Well, that is where a headless CMS comes into place. It's essentially a way that we can manage our content, and then what it does is it just exposes a bunch of API routes. And then what we can basically do is use those API routes to fetch data. And then we can use that route inside of our front-end application. And our front-end application can be literally built in anything. It could be HTML, CSS, JavaScript. It could be React. It could be Next. It could be Vue. It could be Angular. And we can basically build out the front end of our application. We can customize it in any way that we want, and we can still utilize a CMS because all we're really doing is we're making network requests. And that right there is what is basically meant by headless CMS. It is not associated to any UI elements. And what's great about Strapi is that it also creates, of course, the UI. It also creates the endpoints, but it can also be configured with Graphql. And we're actually going to see that in this section. So hopefully you guys are very, very excited. The docs for this is really, really great. So if you want, you can go to strapi.io and then go to docs and read about the documentation. But I'm going to try to cover this as much as possible. So if you want to learn more about it, well, stay with me. To start working with Strapi, we actually have to create a Strapi application. Now we can do that by opening up our terminal and running a create Strapi command. So the first thing that you're going to have to do is open up your terminal and then move into whatever directory you want to place your Strapi application in. So I'm over here, I opened up my terminal, and I'm inside of a directory called Strapi. So now what I can basically do is execute a command that creates a Strapi app in this directory. So let me go about doing that right now. Now before I do that, I need to have Node installed. So I'm only going to be able to run this command if I have Node installed. To check if you have Node installed, you can just in your terminal do node version. If you get a version, that means yes, you do have Node installed. If you get some sort of command saying that, hey, node, this node command is unknown or whatever, then you don't have Node installed. So go ahead, install Node on your local machine, and then come back to this section. So once you have Node installed, or if you already have Node installed, now what you can do is you can do this command over here, npx create Strapi app, and then you can give your Strapi app a name. So I'm going to call this my Strapi app. So my Strapi app. So once I execute this, in a very short while, it's going to ask me a question. So let's just wait a little bit right now. And it's going to ask me this question over here. What type of installation do I want? Do I want quick start or do I want custom? Now, basically what this is doing is with quick start, it's going to create a SQLite database inside of our local machine. So inside of your computer, it's going to create a quick database for us to work with. Custom is if we already have our own database configured. Let's say we have a Postgres database or a MongoDB database, and we want to basically use it right away, then we can basically use the custom settings. However, what we're going to do is we're going to use Quick Start, and we're going to create a quick SQLite database inside of our local machine. And then later on, I'm going to show you how we can basically change it into a more production ready database. Alright, so that's what we're going to do. We're going to do Quick Start. Now, what I'm going to quickly do is I'm going to just quickly cancel this command. And the reason why I'm going to cancel this command is because I already did it, and it actually takes quite a while to do. So you go ahead, continue on with this command. It might be 3 to 5 minutes, but I already did it. And what it should basically do is create a directory right over here. So over here you can see my Strapi app. Now this isn't complete because I didn't finish the installation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this right over here, Strapi Tut, which is a fresh instance of this Strapi application. So I actually did not modify this in any way. So I'm just going to cd right into it, and that is what I am going to be using. So Strapi Tut, because this is a Strapi tutorial. Now to run the application, you're going to run it with this script over here, npm run develop, and it has to be run develop. If it is run start, then you will not have the ability to modify content fields. You have to do it with run develop so you can actually modify certain content. So that is what we are going to do. We're going to do Strapi develop, and we're going to give it a second. And you can see here that it is now running on localhost 1337/admin. And so the first thing that it does is it actually triggers this right over here. And the thing is, Strapi is a CMS, and we don't want the whole world to have access to it. And so essentially the first thing that it does is it asks you to create an account. And this is going to be a super admin account that will allow you to have access to the Strapi console. So let's actually go about creating that one right now. So we're going to do Lath, then we're going to do Harb, which is my last name. For email, let's do lath@lath.lath, which is obviously not a real email. And then for the password, let's do password. Let's do password right over here. And I think it needs some other names over here. Let's do password 123. And I believe this is fine. Actually, no, it has to be capitalized. So let's change this up. Okay, cool. And then we're gonna do let's start right over here. Okay, cool. So right now we have access to the Strapi console right over here. And this is basically how we are going to manage our content. And we're going to be basically creating that example that I gave you. We're going to be creating some sort of interface that basically displays sports cards. And right now we basically want a headless CMS to put our content in it. And that is what we're going to be doing. We're going to be using Strapi to do that. Now, one thing I want to quickly note is if you go to settings and then if you go to users, you can see that over here I have access to this application. I am a super admin. Now, what I can do if I want, I can actually create a user. Let's say I have another member in my team and I want to give him access to this console right over here. So let's say, well, we have Kea. So let's say Kea Doe. That's like the placeholders. So let's say Kea Doe is another person. I can say Kea Doe at strapi.com. And then over here, we can basically give her access. So she can either be an author or she can be an editor. Basically, an author is creating content. Editor is you can create content as well as edit content, or you can just be a super admin. Let's say we want to give her a super admin access. We can go ahead and create this account, and essentially what you would do is you'd basically give her this URL right over here. So you would give her this URL, you'd ping it to her through Slack or Facebook, and then you would she would basically go to that URL, and then she would basically set her password accordingly, and now she would also have access to the console. That's a good way to essentially add more members to the to your Strapi console if you want to. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to continue. Right now it's inactive because, well, she hasn't registered yet. Let me just quickly go ahead and just put some gibberish password. Let's say A123. Let's just copy that down over here. And then let's go ahead and let's start. Now she also has access to this. Now if I were to refresh this quickly, you can see that now they're both active. So this is Kea Do, and then this is Laith Harp. All right, let's just get rid of Kea Do for now. Let's log her out. You can see here that we also have authentication. So if anybody wants to log back in, basically you can give them this route and then they can go ahead and put their credentials. So that is the first thing. We can basically have multiple users that are able to use this console. We can also basically give them certain roles. So right here we have the author role. So if you're a little confused about the author role, you can see that the author role can basically do certain commands. So you can see here with collection types, they can do some certain commands. Over here we have the editor role, and over here of course we have the super admin role. They can do whatever it is that they want. So they can create, they can read, they can update, and they can do whatever it is that they want. Now by default, the editor role and the author role, they can't really do anything. So you can basically just say, hey, by default I'm going to go ahead and I'm just gonna give them the ability to create. I'm going to give them the ability to read and things of that nature. Now you can also create roles if you want, so you can go ahead and you can create roles. However, the community edition has some limits. So what you can do is that maybe you can delete one of these roles if you want to. So you can go ahead and maybe delete this role. I guess the community edition has some limits and we aren't actually able to do this. But we can basically make do with these roles over here. If you need more roles, then maybe you can actually start paying for these. But at the end of the day, these are enough roles. Okay. So this is great. So this is really good, but now we want to actually start managing content in our application. So remember, we're basically want to display a bunch of sports cards. So we need a way to manage all of the content associated to a particular card. So to do that, what we can basically do is we can go over here to the content types builder. So this right over here. And then what we can basically create is a collection type. So a collection type is basically a thing that we can have multiple instances of. So for instance, we can have multiple cards. And we can also have multiple categories if you want to, place cards into categories. A singles type is something like we would have only one instance of. For instance, let's say we have a home page, and that is where we're displaying our cards. Well, we can create a home page type over here, and maybe that home page has some sort of header image or some sort of title, but we don't have multiple instances of the home page. And so that is basically where we would create that over here. So this is more common for pages, whereas this is more common for things that we're going to have multiple instances of. And we're going to have multiple instances of, well, cards. So let's actually go ahead over here and let's click on Create User Collections. Now, one thing that I just to kind of quickly illustrate this, you can see here that this is a collection types over here. So you can see all your collection types, and by default, you get the user's collection type. And the reason why we get the user's collection type is we can have multiple users that are able to use our application. And this makes sense. This really wouldn't make sense to be a single type. All right, so now let's go ahead and let's create a card collection type. And so we're gonna do card over here. And this has to be singular. It's not gonna be plural because Strapi under the hood is going to change it to plural. And then over here you can see we have some basic settings. We can also have some advanced settings. So over here we can see here that we can have the ability to have our cards be in draft mode and not exposed. So we could have that ability. If you don't want that ability, we can basically have it as off. I'll kind of explain this a little bit later. For now, we're just going to keep that as on. So we're going to continue, and then it's going to prompt us with basically all of the types that are inside of this collection. And you can see all of the different things that we have. So in the card, what kind of content do we have? Well, in the card, we could have a title. So this is going to be, well, a text, and we can give this text, well, a name of title. And over here you can see that we have two different types. We have, well, short text, so this is best for titles, names, links, URLs, or long text, which is, you know, good for descriptions, biographies, and whatever. Well, over here we have a title, so I'm going to use short text. Also, what we can do is we can go to advanced settings and we can give this a default value if we want to. Now, I don't want to, so we're not going to do that. We can also have regular expressions if we want to. Again, not going to do that, not a big deal. But over here, there are some other important settings that we may want. For instance, we may want to make this a required field, and this actually kind of makes sense. We don't want to have a card that doesn't have a title. So we can go ahead and say, well, this is a required field. We could also have this be a unique field, but you know, it doesn't really make sense for our situation. We can also say that, hey, we have a maximum length or a minimum length. For instance, let's say here that we want at least a minimum length of 3 and then a maximum length of 20. So let's actually add that in there. We can also have this as a private field. However, we're not going to want this because we actually want to expose this data inside of our API. So let's actually go ahead and let's add this. So now we basically added the title. Now let's say we want to add the description as well. So you can say, hey, maybe what we can do is we can go to text over here and change this to, well, long text. Well, this is probably, well, this works completely fine, but maybe we want to be able to kind of customize the text. Maybe we want to have some sort of italics or some sort of bolding to the text, and we really won't be able to do that with long text. Instead, we would be able to do that with rich text. So that right here is rich text, and this basically allows us to, you know, have bolding, indentation, and it will basically catch all those things. So let's do description. We're going to call this description, and it's going to be of type rich text. Let's go to the advanced setting, and let's make this a required field. Let's also give this a, well, you know what? Who cares about the maximum and the minimum length as long as they have some sort of entry. All right, let's go ahead and add that. And now let's say that we have, I don't know, we're selling these cards. So we want to basically have some sort of price. So what we can basically do at this point is we can have a number field. So we can have a number field and we can say price. And then we can basically over here say the type of price that we want. So do we want integer, big integer, a decimal, or a float? In this case, decimal makes the most sense because, well, we might have cents values inside of our prices. So we can say decimal. Again, default values. Over here, we can basically say, we're just going to say that this is a required field. So let's add this. And the last thing that I'm going to add, and you can see that there's many different options. We can have date, we can have Boolean values, we can have relationships, we can have components, which I'll talk about a little bit later. We can have unique identifier, JSON, a bunch of different things. You guys probably kind of get the point. But the last thing that I'm going to add is an image. So, you know, we're probably going to want an image for our card. So I'm going to say media over here. And I'm just going to call this image. Now, there's two types of images. There's the multimedia. So this is good for sliders. So we can actually add multiple images into this instance. Or we can basically say single media. And that makes most sense for our application because we only want to attach one image to one card. So we can say single media. Again, advanced settings. We can have this be a required field. We can say that, hey, we don't want any videos, any files. We just want images. And then we can go ahead and add this. And this is pretty good for now. This is really good. So now what we can do is we can go ahead and save this. And if it says an error has occurred, please don't mind that. You know, that happens all the time. If this is taking way too long, what you can do is just simply refresh your Strapi instance. And you can see here in the collection type that you have some cards. So let's actually go ahead and let's create a card. And so you can see to create a card, you can just go here and say add new cards. So let's go about doing that. And you can see that this is the way that we're gonna manage our content. We're gonna add content over here, and we can also add content through API routes. Do not worry about that. We'll get to that a little bit later, but we can also do it through this, well, user interface. So let's say, we have a card, LeBron James. Let me increase the font size. Let's see here, increase this just so you can see that. LeBron James rookie card. So this is a LeBron James rookie card. And over here you can see that this is a rich text. So this is a nice rich text. So now what we can basically say is, well, whatever it is that we want. Over here we can see that we have some validation. So this is saying that this is way too long. So maybe instead of rookie, we can basically say, instead of card, well, these are always cards, we can just basically say LeBron James rookie. But you can see here that the validation works. In the description, what we will basically say is, this is LeBron. And then, we can have indentation. We can say he is good at basketball, and maybe we want to bold good, so we can say bold, and we can say good. And you can see here that this isn't really bold. What this is it just creates a bunch of markdown for us, and then what we are responsible for doing is parsing that markdown and displaying it accordingly. So you can see here that, well, this is, well, markdown. I'm not really sure why this is I'm not really sure why that's all bolded up. Let's see here, switch that. There we go, that looks a lot better. Okay, so this is good. He is good at basketball. And of course we can italicize, we can underline, we can do whatever it is that we want. Over here, let's set a price of 4,031 cents. And then what we want to do is we want to add an image. So to add an image, we can click and we can upload some sort of asset. We can either browse our files or drag and drop. I have an image of LeBron James right over here. So this is LeBron. So I'm going to go ahead and add him in there. And I'm going to go ahead and add, well, we can add more assets if we want to, but I'm not going to do that actually. So let's actually go ahead and let's just okay this. Actually, wait, I guess I didn't even upload that asset. So let's upload this guy. So it's taking some time. Actually, let me just drag and drop. Okay, so upload this asset. So what this is going to do is it's going to upload the assets to the library, and it's also going to attach it to this entry. So what happens now is we're basically done. So now what we can do is we can go ahead and save this, and you can see here that this is in draft mode. So we can go ahead and save this, and now what we can basically do is if we go to our entry, we can see our entry right over here, and we can basically see the content, and we can edit the content if we want to, as well as we can delete it, of course. But right now it's in draft mode, so we really don't have access to it from our API route. And so to basically have access to it, what we would have to do is publish it. So we can, of course, publish it or unpublish it, but now we have access to it inside of our API routes. So let's actually go about, well, getting access to this particular card from a certain API route. So to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up Postman. So this is a way that we can basically test HTTP requests. And over here in my Strapi directory, I'm going to create a new request. And I'm going to call this, get cards. So I'm going to call this get cards. And so how is the route going to look like? Well, the route is going to be very, very easy. So it's going to be localhost, 1337, and then it's going to be basically what this is called over here. So localhost and then cards. So we're basically getting a bunch of cards. Now, if you want to get one specific card by ID, we would do something like, well, /1. Let me actually increase the size of this right over here. And so this is how to get a card by ID, but one card by specific ID. Now, if you don't know the exact routes, do not worry. I'll show you a way to actually see them in clear documentation. All right, so let's actually go ahead and send this off, and we get this error right over here. So basically, inherently, what Strapi does is it essentially doesn't expose this route to the external world. And this makes sense because we don't want everybody in the world to be able to get our data, delete our data, and create our data. So we essentially, what we probably want to do is we want to specify what we want the outside world to do. For instance, we might want, and we really don't care if the outside world can get our data because, well, we're just displaying data. So we might not care if, hey, they can get all of our data, they can see all of our data, but we don't want the outside world to create data. We don't want the outside world to delete data or update data. So that's something that we don't want to do. So over here, Strapi inherently sets a bunch of permissions. So to see the permissions, just go to settings, and then you can go to roles. Roles over here, user and permission plugins. And you can see here authenticated permissions and then public permissions. So over here, authenticated is basically, hey, these are the roles that authenticated users can perform. So if some sort of authenticated user wants to delete a post, and we basically said that, hey, yes, they're allowed to delete cards or whatever, then well, that's fine. But over here, these are the roles for the public over here. And so we probably don't want the public to perform certain actions. And you can see here that in cards, we can basically see the actions that they can take. For instance, we can count all the cards, we can create cards, we can find cards, we can update cards, find one card, delete card. Now, the public, we probably don't want them to delete, we probably don't want them to update, we probably don't want them to create. But, well, we don't really care if they find. We actually do want them to find all the cards, to get all the cards. So we can basically check this off. And you can see here that the find route is basically a get request to /cards. And this is the way that we can basically figure out the route paths. Now also, we can basically say find one. We don't care if they find one card. So you can see here, this is the path for that. And we don't care if that they can count all the cards. So we can basically do that as well. So we can go ahead and save this. Now this is the general public. However, an authenticated user, we might just want them to do everything. We might want them to create cards, delete cards, and updated cards. We don't really care. So we can basically save that. So right now, this is an unauthenticated request. So essentially now what we're gonna do is we're gonna send this off, and now you can see that we get our data. And you can see that Strapi has created an ID. It also, well, it has a title. You can see here that this is just the markdown. You can see all of the new lines. And you can see over here that this is bolded. You can see that the price is here. And then you can see that it actually created a few more things. It created the published at, created at, and updated at. So we can actually have all those fields over here. Now, the image is a little crazy. So it's actually a lot of data. But I really love how Strapi does things with it. So essentially what Strapi does is it formats it into different types. So that way we can basically use different images for our application. For instance, if we need a very, very small image, we can basically use this format, the thumbnail format. And essentially now what we can basically do to access that, we can basically do something like this. We can do localhost 1337 and then the URL path, and you can see here that we get a small thumbnail of that image. Now if we want a larger image, what we can do is you can use, well, the larger format. So right over here, large. So let's go over here and let's change that to large. And you can see here that we have a larger image. And this is actually really important for performance, because if we don't really need a large image, then that's not probably something that we want to use. All right, okay, so that is terrific. So this is basically all of the data. And we can also find by one. So we can basically say find one. And over here, we can get basically that one over here. And we can also count. So we can also count. However, what we cannot do, what we absolutely cannot do, is maybe have a post request, and that allows us to, well, post a card. So you can see here, if I send this off, you can see that, hey, we get forbidden. So let's actually create a user now that is actually able to do this, an authenticated user that is able to do this. All right, so let's go about doing that right now. So the first thing we have to do is we have to go to the users collection and we have to create a user. So I'm going to call this user, well, Lath. So we can say username is Lath. We can say lath@lath.com. And we can say that the password is, it's too short. Let's say anteater 123. And what we can basically do is give them the authenticated role. So we're going to give them the authenticator role. So now what we can do is we can basically save this user. And you can see here that, hey, now this user is saved. So basically now what we can do is we can actually, in our front-end application, however way we create it, we can have an authentication flow. So basically now this user can go ahead and make some sort of authenticated request. Now in Strapi, this authenticated request is going to look something like this. So let's just call this auth, or not sauce, auth. And it's going to look something like this. So let's go ahead and let's copy this URL. And it's going to be /auth/local. And the reason why it's /local is because we are using email and password. But Strapi actually does support OAuth flows. So it actually supports things like signing in with GitHub or signing in with Facebook or Google. So that is something that you guys can look into. But for this crash course, we're just going to do a simple, username/login. All right, so this is the path over here, and this is going to be a post request. And in the request body, we're going to provide with two things. We're going to provide identifier, and this can either be the username or the email. So let's go ahead over here. We can either use the email or the username. I'm going to use just the username. And then we're going to provide the password. So the password is, I believe, I'm actually forgetting, I think it's anteater123. I hope that's what it is. So now what we can basically do is we can actually make this request. Let me just quickly have a wrong password in there. And if I send this off, you can see that we actually get a 400, a status code of 400. And we can see the message. We can say identifier or password is invalid. So you can see here that you can actually use this request to handle your front end accordingly. Now what I can basically do is, let's say I go ahead and I provide the right password. Now what I get is a good 200 response. And I get an object with two things. The first thing is the user information. So we got the username, the email, the provider, which is local, it's not GitHub or anything. And you can see their role right over here. This is an authenticated user. And then I also have, this JSON Web Token. And this JSON Web Token is a very common way of authenticating users. And if you don't know what JSON Web Tokens are, I do have a crash course on JSON Web Token authentication. So I'm not going to cover it in this section. But essentially, to display that we're authenticated, we're going to take this JSON Web Token and put it inside of every single request header. So now what we can basically do is let's actually create another post request. So let's actually go ahead and do that. Let's save this request, and let's actually save this as a get request. We're going to create another post request. And remember, posting is only done by authenticated users. So we're going to create a post request, and I'm going to call this create card. So let's go ahead and let us inside of the header, so inside of actually authorization, what we're going to do is we're going to have bearer token, and we're going to display the token that we just created. So I'm going to essentially have that over here. And what this is going to do is going to display it in the header. So this is going to display this token in the header, and then our application, or the Strapi application, is basically going to parse that header, get that JSON Web Token, and then essentially check it out and see who that user is and whether they're authorized to make a certain request. Again, if you don't know what JSON Web Token authentication is, highly suggest pause this video and watch my JWT crash course. All right, so now that this is in the JWT header, or sorry, the authentication header, what we can do now is we can actually make a post request. So let's actually go here and let's make a post request. So let's make a post request. Now post requests are going to be hard because, well, we're gonna have to supply it with an image. So what I'm gonna quickly do here is I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna make the image optional, because I really have no idea how I'm gonna supply some sort of image inside of the URL. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna just make this image optional, and this is actually a good way to see how we can actually update certain fields. So for instance, now what we can basically do is we can go to cards and we can see edit the fields. So we can configure the view. For instance, if we're not happy with the way that this looks, you can configure the view and we can basically put the price here if we want to. We want the title, the price, description, and then we can go ahead and save this. We can confirm, and we can go back to the cards. And you can see here we get the title, the price, the description, the image, which is great. Now, what we want to do is we want to make this not required. So what we can do to do that is edit this field, and then we can edit the images. And then essentially now we can basically say that, hey, this is not a required field, finish, go ahead and save it. So all we really have to do is just provide a title, a description, and a price. So let's go ahead and do that right now in Postman. Okay, so this is JSON. So we're gonna say title, and we're gonna say a post. We're gonna say the description, or well, this is not really a post, sorry. Let's call this a Kobe Bryant card. So Kobe Bryant, and then the description is going to be Kobe is great. And then the price is going to be $50,030. So this is going to be that. Now again, this is a authenticated user. You can see here that we have the JSON web token. So if we actually send this off, you can see that, hey, we can actually create this user and our image is null. So now, basically, actually what we can do is we can see that right over here. This actually was created and added. Now let's say that this wasn't an authenticated user. So basically, hey, we didn't have this JSON web token inside of this, inside of our header. So if we were to make this request, you can see that this is completely forbidden. So this is a good way to basically ensure that, hey, only certain users can perform these more sensitive requests. All right, so that is terrific. And also, let's actually go to our body and let's actually provide a title that is too long. Remember, we have a limit with basically our title. So let's provide a title that's insanely long. And you can see here that, hey, this is a bad request error. The title must be at most 20 characters. So it does kind of validation right off the bat. All right, so this is terrific. Now, one thing I want to quickly note is that you're not confined to a REST API. If you have desires to use GraphQL, you can do that very easily. All you have to really do is just go to the marketplace and you can basically install a bunch of plugins. Now, I think most of these plugins are installed already. For instance, we can actually send emails relatively easily with Strapi. Obviously, this is a content manager. We have roles and permissions, which we have used already. But over here, we can also have a GraphQL, and this basically creates a GraphQL endpoint. So now what we can do is we can basically install this, and this might take some time. Hopefully it doesn't take too long, but it might take some time to install. And you can actually see that over here in the terminal, it's installing GraphQL. So once it's installed, it should go back to something that looks a little something like this. And you can double check if it's installed. When you refresh the console, it should say already installed. Now, basically what you can do now is you can go to localhost 1337 and then /GraphQL. And if you're familiar with GraphQL, well, you can see here that we are prompted with the GraphQL playground. So over here, we can start making some queries. If you don't know GraphQL, don't worry. We're going to continuously use REST for this example. But if you want to use GraphQL, you can go ahead and use it. So let's just take a quick example. We can say card and we can, let's say cards actually, to get all the cards, and we can basically ask for what it is that we want. We want the ID, let's say we also want the title, and that's all we want. Well, you can see here we have LeBron, we have Kobe, and we have Kobe. So it seems like we have created Kobe multiple times when we created that post request, and that's because, well, we were testing it quite a bit. So now what we can basically do is we can either delete it through our routes, or we can just delete those instances by just selecting them and just deleting them through our content management system. But if you are interested in GraphQL, then this is how you would go ahead and do it. And of course, you can create mutations, and it automatically has these mutations for us. So create card, and then essentially, again, this is all self-documenting, so you can basically see what are the queries and mutations that we have exposed. Alright, so that is if you want to use it with GraphQL. We're going to continuously just use it with REST because that's the way that we've done it before. So again, if I go ahead and I fetch all these things, now we have, well, these two pieces of information. Alright, so this is terrific, but now let's say what we want to do is we want to put all of our cards into certain categories. So for instance, if they're basketball cards, we want to put them in the basketball category. If they're baseball cards, well, we want to put them into the baseball category. Well, to do this, we're going to have to create a new collection type. And the reason why we're creating a new collection type is we can have multiple categories. We can have basketball, we can have baseball, hockey, we can have whatever. So this is, again, why we're going to create a collection type. Again, to create a collection type, just go to the content type builder and then go over here, create type. And we're going to call this category. Again, we're going to call this singular because under the hood, Strapi is going to change this to plural. Over here, we're not going to want the draft system. So if we actually create it, we want this to be publicly exposed. We don't really care about draft. So we can basically do continue there. And now we're prompted with this over here. Really, all we're going to have is a text. And we're just going to say that, hey, this is the category. Let's say that this is the title. So basketball, baseball, or whatever. And this is going to be a short text, and it's going to be absolutely required. So let's go ahead and let's just say, hey, you know what, that's pretty much it. However, now what we want to somehow do is we want to relate many cards to a particular category. Now, how do we do that? Well, to do this, we're going to have to add another field. And this field is the relation field. And essentially what this does is it refers to another collection type. So you can see here that this is the category field, and what we want to do is we want to basically relate the category field to the cards field. And if we had more fields, and I guess we have these kind of default fields, we can change them to whatever it is that we want. Now you can see here we can also define the type of relationship. So you can see this is a kind of a one-to-one relationship. A category has one card. Now we can also say that a category has and belongs to one card as well. So this is another relationship. Now we can also do the relationship where a category belongs to many cards. So basically a category can have multiple cards. We can also do the opposite relationship where a card has many categories. This, well, doesn't really make sense because, well, a category should also have many cards. But we could also do a many-to-many relationship where a card can actually fall into multiple categories, and multiple categories, as well as a category can house multiple cards. So that is a little bit complex. I don't really care for that right now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do this relationship over here where a category belongs to many cards, but a card can only belong to one category. And you can see here that this is going to create actually two fields. One in the category collection type and one in the card collection type. And this is going to be called category, and this over here is going to be called cards. So we can actually go ahead and finish this. And now we can basically save this. And now we have basically created a relationship. So again, this might take a little bit of time. I just like to refresh. And of course, this whole thing went down for a bit, but that's not a problem. So now we can basically see that we have categories. So let's actually add a category, and I'm just going to add basketball. So basketball, and let's also create another category. We're going to call this baseball. Okay, so we're going to call this baseball. Now what we can do in here, and you can see that there's 0 items. So what we can do now is, let's say we go to the basketball, you can see we get this field right over here. This cards field right over here. And you can see that we can actually place these cards in here. So we can have Kobe, we can have LeBron if we want to, and we can go ahead and save it. We can also basically add them from this field right over here. So if you go to cards, you can see that we can, hey, pick the category that we want. For instance, let's say that, hey, this LeBron card, we want to place it in the category. Now right here is placed in the basketball category because we basically placed it right over here in the category collection type. But we can also, again, update it over here as the category. So we can basically close this and I can say, hey, no, this is actually baseball for some reason. And I can save that. And now if I go to categories, you can see that this has been updated to 1 item. We have Kobe, and then we have LeBron right over here. Now we can again add this over here. We can add LeBron, we can save that. And what that's going to do is going to remove it from here because again, we only have a one-to-many relationship, not a many-to-many relationship. Okay, that makes complete sense. Let's actually go ahead and let's just create another card. Let's actually create a baseball player. I think let's create Derek Jeter. I think that's how you spelled Derek Jeter's name. Let's say price of 300. I'll just put some gibberish. I don't really care for this. And for the image, whatever. I don't really care. And let's also place this in the baseball category. So we're going to go ahead and save this. And what we're going to do is we're going to quickly start querying for the categories right over here. Now to do this, again, we're going to want to change the permissions. So we would have to go to roles right over here. And we want to basically say that, hey, the public can count, find, and find one category. So that they can do all of these. So we can go ahead and save this. And we can also say that the authenticated users can do it all. They can do whatever it is that they want. Alright, so now let's go to Postman. And I'm just going to, in this request right here, just change this to categories. So we can say categories, and now you can see that we get, well, an array of categories. We get the ID, we get the title, and then we get an array of cards. So we can see here we get LeBron James, and then over here we have Kobe, and then over here, okay, this is strange. I thought we would have a Derek Jeter card, but we don't, which is kind of strange. And this is where, well, that's only really because we left this in draft mode. So now we can basically publish this. And now if we were to make this request, we can go ahead and see that, hey, this is Jeter. Another thing that I want to quickly note is we can actually add query params into our URL to really specify the data that we want to get back. For instance, you can go to the Strapi documentation and you can see that you can have, well, the limit query param. So right now we're basically getting, if I were to make this request again, we're getting, well, the basketball category as well as the baseball category. And let's say we had multiple categories. Let's say we had thousands of categories and we wanted to get like the first 100. Well, we would use the limit query param right over here. So you can go ahead and let's copy this. So it would be, the question mark symbolizing the query param and then underscore limit, and we're just going to limit it to 1 because we really have 2 and I want to demonstrate this. So you can see here now we only get basketball and we don't get baseball, so we can actually add that over there. We can also do a bunch of things. We can also do start if we want to. This is basically offset. We can also do sorting, so we can basically sort through ascending order. So over here we can do sort, and then basically what property we want to sort by, then ascending or descending. So yes, you can add these commands right over here. Okay, so that is, well, really great, and I think that really covers a great amount of Strapi. So what I'm going to quickly do now is I'm going to just quickly, very quickly introduce these other types over here. So over here we can have a single type, and again, a single type is something that we really just have one of. And this could be, again, something like a home page. Now the home page could be, well, let's call this home page. And then the home page, you'll see the advanced settings. We can say that the advanced settings is not going to have draft mode, because really it's just going to be one type over here. And now over here we can say maybe the home page has some sort of header, and I think that is fine. But basically the home page is going to have multiple categories. It's going to display multiple cards, for instance. So we can basically add another relationship, and we can say that, hey, a home page has multiple categories that display multiple cards. So we can add that in there if we want to. So now we can go ahead, and I'm just going to quickly save this. And let's just wait. Let's just refresh. This takes quite a while. Let's refresh. There we go. Okay, and now you can see here that we get a single type. We can say, you know, the header could be something like my card collection, and then we can say over here that, well, I want to display these categories. So we can go ahead and save this, and you can see that we can't really create another instance of this. That's because, well, this is a single type. And then we can basically query for this as normal. Again, if we want to query for this, we would have to go ahead and basically set the permissions accordingly. So we would have to go here, and we would just say that, hey, the home page, you can just find data that we want. So I'm not going to do that, but again, this is something that you can do with single types. Now, the last thing that I'm going to talk about over here is the components type. And that's is basically when we have multiple fields that are identical across multiple collection types. For instance, let's say we wanted to have a field that basically describes the user that created that specific collection type. So the first name, the last name, and you know what, that's pretty much it. So we would just want their first name and their last name. And we want that for every single type. So the cards, the categories, and we can have maybe hundreds of different types over here. Well, we could add a first name, last name in every single collection type if we wanted to, but that could be cumbersome, especially if we wanted to add more information later on. So we want to basically add maybe the first name, the last name, as well as their phone number, as well as their email. Then we would have to actually create it for every single collection type, and that can get very cumbersome. So instead, what we will use is components. And essentially components is going to be a collection of types. So we're going to say user info. So this is going to be user info. And actually, you know what? Maybe creator info is a better name. So creator info. And then over here, we can basically select a category or create one. We haven't created one yet. So we're going to call this the exact same thing. We're actually going to create one called create info, and we actually have to give it an icon. So let's just give it an icon of this right over here. I'm not really sure why they force us to create an icon. And now what we can do is we can basically continue, and now we can assign fields to this component. So we can say that first name, so we can say first name, and we can say that this is required, and so we can add this. We can also say last name, and then we can also say that this is required, and we can add this, and I think that's good enough for now. So now we can basically save this, and this is going to take some time. Let's again refresh. Everything breaks, and there we go. Okay, so now we can see that we actually have a creator info component. So now what we can do is in here, we can go ahead and we want to modify this. So we would go to content type, we would go to the collection type that we want to modify, and we want to say we want to add a field. And we're going to say we want to add a component field. And we can create a new one, or we can choose it from an existing one. So we're going to do that. And then we're going to say that this is creator info. So this is creator info. And then the collection or the component type is, well, the creator info, and this is going to be best for multiple instances. This is going to be a single component. We don't want an array entry of this. So So we can go ahead and we can save this, and you can see now that it creates a component with these two fields right over here. And now we can essentially do the exact same thing with the categories. So we can do the exact same thing with the categories. Again, go to collection type, and then we can basically go ahead and add a field, and now we can add a component, and we can use an existing one, and we can go ahead and we can just call this creator info as well. Make this a single type, creator info, add this in there, and then we can go ahead and save it. So now let's give it a quick while. So now if you want to create or edit a thing, we can actually see here that we have, well, the creator type. So we can actually put in the first name and the last name. And similarly, we can do that in the category as well. So we can go here and put the first name and the last name. Now let's say we wanted the email as well to be a part of the creator type. So now what we can basically do at that point is instead of adding the email to both the card and the category, all we would do is go to the component, and we would just basically add email over here. So we can just say email. So we can finish this, save this, and again, this takes some time usually. But now if we want to go to the creator type, you can see email, and the same thing is going to be true over here. So in the categories as well, we can see email. So this is really good way of putting information that is going to be common throughout many collection types. So that way we don't have to create it manually. We have this layer of abstraction. All right, so that is pretty much it. The last thing I want to quickly cover is the code itself. So we actually did a lot of stuff here without really coding anything, but under the hood, Strapi is, well, coding this out for us. It's creating some sort of API for us, and it has to do that through code. And essentially it's doing that through, well, this directory, and we can actually open this up to take a look at it. So over here we have the cache file. Don't worry about that. Over here we have the .tmp file, and this is actually where our data is stored in our local machine. So you can see here data.db. Over here we have our API, and you can see this is the API endpoint. So we have the card, we have the category, we have the home page, and it has automatically created this for us. So now what we can, let's actually explore the stuff in a particular endpoint. So you can see here in the config file, if you want to see all the paths, you can see that these are all the paths that have been created. We have the get path, and this is the path over here. Similarly, we have the count path, we have the get find one, and you can see here that this is the handler that it's calling. So essentially it's going to call a specific handler which has a lot of functionality that is going to do all the finding for us. And similarly over here we have post, put, and then delete. Now essentially the handlers are going to be housed inside of the controllers. Now this is really just used for if we want to customize our controllers. For instance, let's say that we want to have add additional functionality for the find card component. So for instance, what we would do here is, let's say we want to get the cards. And again, the cards would look something like this. And let's say we want to, instead we want it to have some additional functionality. We can actually code that functionality out over here. So what we would do is we would find the handler, and then we would just inside of the controller or inside of the service, we can basically do async, and then we can do like find, because this is the ultimate handler that is being called. And then we can do, whatever functionality that we want to, and then we can just return our data. So if we were using an ORM, we'd probably use some sort of, or if we were using a database, we'd probably use some sort of ORM or whatever, and then return that data. Right now, I'm just gonna return I'm not even, it's like 11 p.m. at night. I'm not gonna bother spelling it. I'm just gonna say changed or whatever. So changed. So now actually, what we can do, if I make this request again and give it some time, actually, there we go. You can actually see that it's actually using this right over here instead of what it has been doing default wise. So obviously this is not something that you want to do. You don't want to just say change. You actually want to have logic and return your data accordingly. But this also gives you the flexibility to add data or basically modify your routes. So you can see here we also have our models. Again, if you want to change your models, just read the documentation as to how that's happening. Services, this is really where the change is going to happen. I just did it in the controller really quickly just to kind of explain it to you. So that's the API. This is the build right over here. Don't really worry about that. That's just for building our production ready Strapi application. We have our components right over here. Remember, this is the creator info. You can see that this has been created. We also got a config. Now the config is really important because this is where the database is going to lie. So over here, if I click on the database.js, you can see here that it's using a SQLite database, and then it's also using, well, here's the file name. But if you want to change this to MongoDB, or if you want to change it to Postgres in Heroku or AWS, then we're gonna want to change these settings right over here. And I'm gonna leave this kind of up to you. Strapi has really good documentation as to how to configure a MongoDB or Postgres or MySQL database. So just go ahead and read the documentation and basically change these settings accordingly right over here. But that is basically where you would do that in the functions. So over here, we also have the secret. If you know anything about JSON Web Tokens, well, this is the secret that we're housing. You can change that if you want to as well. Exports, this is our schema, our GraphQL schema. Extensions, well, these are some extensions. Don't have to really worry about that. Node modules. And that's pretty much it. So again, Strapi is pretty great with actually being developer first and allowing to customize our stuff. So that is pretty much it for Strapi. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you guys in the next one.